238 on the white papers. 238. Councillors, I'd like to just draw your attention to reconvene this meeting. It is 2:50 p.m, Dave, and the reconvened meeting is now open. Our CEO would like to make a statement in regard to public transport section. I mean, it's a standing committee. It's only been going now for 2.5 years. It's groundbreaking, and all the stars came together, you know, i.e. we had a central government that's pro-public transport, and we've certainly worked well with them and with a whole new young team. I think we're making great progress, and certainly one of your KPIs, Mr. CEO, and it's over to you if you'd like to make some comments.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to acknowledge the work that probably started off with Janine and what Mark's carried on in his new director role with respect to getting that business improvement review done and actually getting a strategy past you today. I actually thought that was going to be one of the ones that would be a real stretch to get done. Small team, working at absolute pace, in difficult times, you know, when trying to procure someone who could even do the review in the first place. So I just wanted to take the opportunity in front of you just to acknowledge Mark and his team for what they've done, and Janine, who was initially involved in getting that underway. It's quite a milestone day, really, with the decision made today. Thanks.
And Mike Garrett, before that, the item on the agenda now is that the Lake Taupō Protection Project draft project review. Question I have as chair to you, Chris, how many times do we have to relitigate this? Is it not the answer that some people want, or am I being a bit hard making those comments?
I'm going to refer your comment through to Director Williams, because I haven't been involved in the committees and what happens behind the scenes.
A brilliant response as the CEO. Director Williams.
Yep, thank you, Chair Russ. So yes, this is a perennial issue that keeps raising its head, but not unexpected in this particular case, given that when we went out for consultation in the annual plan process in conjunction with Taupō District Council, the findings, and you'll see the options that are in the report, the option that we ended up landing was that we would undertake a review again of the trust by the end of June 2023. What we've just determined is that we would like to bring the review forward and conclude it before the next elections in October. And we think that's a fitting thing to do. And obviously in that determination through the long-term plan, it was an independent review. And at the time we were thinking of using Audit New Zealand, but our understanding is Audit New Zealand are really under the pump and don't have the capacity to do that review. So in discussions with the Joint Committee, who have helped guide this process, and to be frank, I'd just like to acknowledge Marley's work in this. She's held the pen on this over recent times, and it has been difficult because the Joint Committee has been unable to formally meet for 2 consecutive meetings for want of a quorum. And so getting this particular recommendation in front of you today, and it went to Taupō District Council yesterday, who ratified it, has been quite challenging, given we haven't gone through a formal committee process. It has to end up being done by way of a workshop. But ultimately the outcome of that process is that we're recommending the independent review be presented to 3 parties, KPMG, PwC and BDO New Zealand, for their consideration and presentation to the officials working group. Still to be confirmed the establishment of that group, but the officials working group will include membership from the Crown, from Taupō District Council and from WRC. It doesn't include the trust. The trust has identified that they would have a conflict of interest to be involved in that process, that we would manage that tender process, I suppose, for want of a better word. Upon receipt of the responses, should we be lucky enough to receive 3 responses back or 3 proposals back, then the officials working group would determine which agency would be the best to undertake the review on our behalf. You'll see attached as an appendix a fairly substantial briefing paper to go out with that proposal to those 3 agencies. And I think it provides a really good summary of the history of the project and the timeline and the events that have occurred. And noting that in 2018, the Crown funding ceased and that they've been operating since 2019 as a trust off the residual savings that had accrued from the 80 million initial funding received. So, we are aware that there's some split views between Taupō District and our council around maintaining the trust into the future. In discussions with Taupō District Council about confirming the terms of reference for the review, you will note included in there that one of those areas we want the reviewers to look at is what potential other options might exist for the trust. Not saying to continue the work that they are currently doing, unless that becomes the response from the reviewing agency, but more around what other options may be there for them that they might want to consider in their own right. Now, that was a bit of a point of contention with us in Taupō District, but we felt that it was okay to leave that in there within the review criteria because it helped us to move on and get agreement on the remainder of the review elements. So I guess, that is the broader context of what we're proposing today. In answer to your question about why are we doing this again, it's because we said we would. We're hopeful it's the last time. Should that not be the case, then we are stuck in another review process at some point down the track. But we have to roll the dice, for want of a better word, and allow the review to be undertaken and then live with whatever the recommendations are. However, in saying that, all three parties, the settlers, must support the recommendation that the reviewers make. So if any one of the three parties has a completely different view or is unable to support that, then that recommendation would fail. And the next stage would have to be another review. So I just wanted to clarify that because that is one of the requirements that all three parties must agree on the future state post this next round. Also subject to that review outcome will be a determination around the governance of the project. So currently we have a joint committee, which we understand that's been established. That potentially may not be the structure that remains post this arrangement. I'll take the report as read. Hopefully my clarifying remarks have been useful and happy to take questions.
By speaking order, I've got Councillor Kneebone and then Councillor Quayle, but before so I'm going to ask the constituent Councillor White to make any comment.
Oh, sorry. Oh, thank you. I wasn't at this particular meeting. I turned up to the previous meeting, but we didn't have a quorum, so an extraordinary meeting had to be held. And I think it was Katarina was there. Was she? Yes. So I can't actually tell you too much specifically about this meeting, but I think what Neville has told you is correct. I think the only other things that were the other thing that has changed is that originally the officials working group was just the settlers, I believe, and two wharetoa have been added to that group. I think that was done at the last meeting when I wasn't there. Is there anything that you need to tell us? The only thing I guess I just wanted to say was that I think it is really important that this audit is independent. We had some issues, we had some concerns around the last one because of the involvement of the trust in the officials working group review. So I just wondered whether Neville can actually confirm for us how we're going to make sure that that this review that's done is as independent as possible and that nobody overly influences anything. Thanks.
Councillor Williams. Independence regardless of who pays for the report.
I don't know if that's a promotion. Look, Councillor White's correct. Two wharetoa Trust Board have been added as a working party member, and that was at at their request, if I recall rightly, and there was no concerns raised by any of the joint committee members about supporting that recommendation. The role of the Officials Working Party is more administrative than it was in the past. So if you may recall, some of you, that from the previous review, there was a lot of fingerprints from the Officials Working Party all over that review process. And in terms of the costing, sizings, and all sorts of other work that went on. So I think that was recognised to some degree by this council, and hence why we asked for the review to be undertaken, conducted independently. And so we have to have faith in that process, that out of the three identified potential providers of the service, that they will undertake it in a professional and independent fashion, that they have their own reputations and obviously large concerns of a lot of, I guess, a lot of experience behind them, who would not want to sully that with undertaking anything inappropriate. Ultimately, the decision from the recommendations is the officials, the settlers, and so that'll have to be a forum that we convene separately for all three parties to come together and determine. That will exclude Taupō Trust Board, obviously, and not, as they are not a settler agency.
Okay. It's Councillor Kneebone, Councillor Quayle, Councillor Mahuta, Councillor McPherson. Stu, you've got the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I wanted to move the recommendations, please, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Councillor Kneebone.
And
seconded by Councillor White. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for the good work you've done on this, Neville. I know it's been pretty challenging at times. I'm confident in the process we've got here, and note that yourself, Russ and Mac and I and the Taupō Mayor and two of their councillors all agreed to this review, and it's good we've got it a wee bit earlier. So would have thought it would have looked pretty awkward on their part if they don't accept their recommendations from it, given the professionalism of the three options for the reviewers. So yeah, happy to move. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, and your work on this matter is as well. Councillor Quayle?
Yeah, just wanted to make sure from the Director Williams, that the terms of reference are going to be absolute key, because that's going to be the instrument by which those three entities are going to respond. So is he happy that those terms of reference are wide enough scope that don't confine a particular outcome? Thanks.
Gretchen?
I am happy. Obviously, the review brief will form the backbone of the terms of reference, so it won't be vary in any great way, shape or form. And specifically in regard to the scope, and unless somebody has a specific concern about scope, either not enough or too wide, then now's the opportunity to raise that. It has been through a fairly robust process to get to where we are today, and been well tested, and certainly incorporates the views of the Crown and Taupō District and WRC as well. But this council has the opportunity if it wishes. You also note the milestones and the deliverable dates. So we are aiming for quite a truncated process, really, to get the job done by the end of September, so that we can make a determination as prior to the election. So.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Barry. Councillor Mahuta.
And just in support of that, thank you for all the work done to date. But I just note in my term as council, this relationship has been somewhat under review. So Kathy, I think you'd agree at this least number, third go round for us. So just to support that, I just want to say that in my other roles, commissioning work right now is steep, even of the big three. So does this provide you enough of a frame that someone with that requisite skill, who may be retired or in another position right now, because if you can get someone from those, awesome in this next short while, but they're giving away audits and things like that, just in the rest of the world. I just want to know that if one of those three firms can't do it in this time frame, that's counted. What else have we got? Just say in terms of, or you're confident?
Yeah, so we don't have a plan B around this at this stage. We would have
Yeah.
to go back to the joint committee and the 3 settler agencies and reconfirm other options. So
Yeah.
we've
So
deliberately
narrowing it down
kept
to
it.
the 3,
Yeah,
if they
we've
don't have someone, suitably qualified to do it or available right now. That's my biggest fear, is that you have to go back around the Māori bush.
That potentially could be an unintended consequence of focusing on the 3 that we have, but we needed to be able to give certainty to all 3 settlers that these were the agencies we were approaching, and that there was confidence in their capability. The capacity issue is yet to be tested.
And then there's my other thing, earlier in the piece, when the arrangements for Lake Taupō were starting to settle, we did raise with, what are they called? Who does settlements? Sorry. Officer Treaty Settlements and Te Arawhiti, that in Taupō, the layers of the different timings of things was going to be really evident. We're going to have a very noisy governance schedule for the lake. You go. Tūwhare toa, te koteitanga, all the ones listed in the report. What is the Crown's obligation to seek efficiency and support this? And why are we paying for it? Because they rejected that advice when we gave it to them 6 to 7 years ago and left us with a problem of the smallest entity in the arrangements trying to retrofit itself to fit the arrangements.
Yes.
So I still think somehow we've got to write a letter up that way, make them a little bit very responsible. Don't know if the trust has done any of that.
No, those are really valid points, and I was party to those conversations 6, 7 years ago, and we tried to advocate for the Crown to rationalise a number of entities in the catchment, and you'll see them all listed there from page probably 247. There's 3 pages of them. Now all of those entities are all guarding and protecting the same thing, and the Crown has demonstrated through that process when it moved forward, and you'll recall that they brought Te Kotahitanga actually into the chamber unexpectedly, because they had a sense that we were going to prolong our commitment to that deed of settlement. So they brought them up to try and sort of put a bit of pressure on us to move forward with our support for the deed of settlement. Now, that was never a point of contention from our perspective, I believe, but it was certainly one we wanted to draw the Crown's attention to in respect to rationalisation and reducing some of those inefficiencies and costs. And that did form a submission that was made, but to all intents and purposes, the Crown wanted to land that deed of settlement and then walk away. And that's still the sense I get about their position.
Okay, Councillor Mahuta. Councillor McPherson, then Councillor White.
So, Director Williams, when you talk in paragraph 19 about the project, I want to be really clear I understand what that means. That is the project that took $80-odd million, moved up 170 tonnes of nitrogen, set up 27 or sub 50 nitrogen discharge agreements, and has allowed a cap and trade situation. That's all we're talking about, isn't it?
Absolutely. So the project agreement, yes, is the parent.
Okay. So I didn't want to be commenting on something that I was misunderstanding. In the draft for the review, will we ask the reviewers to consider the aspirations of the founding trustees? Because I think at the time the founding trustees were pretty clear about their aspirations in terms of a lifespan. That's my first question.
We can make that absolutely crystal clear, because the expectation is that all parties have an opportunity to have their views discussed and considered by the reviewers. So by that I mean the settlers.
I don't know how many of the original trustees are still with us, but if there needs to be some way of canvassing their views at the time, and I'm sure there's
I understand.
Rich record. Second question is, will the review be cognizant of our stated position on the funding of this trust in its current form? Because we've been really clear.
Yes, so it will be explicit in terms of what we determined at as an outcome of the last consultation process, that we were only prepared to fund 50% of the lowest cost option. And that's where we are, our position at this stage. As you know, we're not funding at all because of the condition was explicit that they come and work out of our facility, and they didn't. And a big part of the contribution we were making was around kind and offer services and provision of accommodation. So they're not utilising that, and they're okay with that, so they can maintain their independent position. So there's no reason why we would move from that.
My final question is, you answered my first question around what the project was. Our obligations as the stakeholders at the moment are to make sure that those NDAs are protected and are in an environment where they can still be traded into perpetuity. Is that correct?
That is correct. None of the obligations we have entered into up until this point can be foregone. So even post all of this, we still have an obligation as the as an agency, a member of the overall body, to maintain the accountabilities associated with the arrangement previously put in place. So it's contractual. Does that make sense?
So therefore, Chair, I think it's really important that we express the view that value for money, those 27 or sub 50 agreements can be traded very cost efficiently. And I'm hoping that when it comes our turn to korero with whoever the reviewers are, we can have a discussion around this isn't, because to me as a newbie, or a backbencher, I think the term is, it strikes me that this is a group of people in a project looking for a job to do. And I don't want to support any of that I don't want any spotlight, any sunlight to get through an opportunity for this group to go away and say, we'll do the nitrogen discharge agreements. Oh, and by the way, we're going to go and be bigger than Ben-Hur for the rest of the lake. That would be absolute failure, in my humble opinion. We've only got one obligation, I think.
Yes.
Make sure that 170 tonnes of nitrogen stays out of the lake.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor White?
I just wanted to make a couple of things clear, but also just to ask one other question of Neville, following on from what Andrew just said. So Audit New Zealand was approached about doing this, but they weren't available to do weren't available to do it at this time.
Yes, so the feedback we got from Taupō District Council was that they had struggled to get Audit New Zealand to do their annual report.
Oh, right.
And that they were under the pump, that they were well behind, and that they had a schedule of work in front of them that was going to keep them busy for a while to come. And so they weren't regarded as being a viable contractor for this purpose.
If I could just add to that, I am aware that Audit NZ are under the pump.
Right.
And there's a number of organisations that traditionally audit, and they've had to build out to third parties.
Right.
So it's definitely the case. I think there's even questions whether they could do ours at one point.
Just wanted you to know that had been considered. But also just about that comment about the number of organisations, we have been trying for a long time to get somebody to rationalise, but yeah, it just doesn't seem to ever happen. No one wants to do it. But the one thing that I did want to follow on from Andrew's question was about the project that it's still only referring to the nitrogen discharge reduction agreements. Can I just check with you, Neville, because I thought that Taupō District Council wanted it included in the review, that we could actually consider what else might be possible for the trust to do. Yes. And I expressed at the time with you and Marley, I think that I had some concerns around that, although, you know, I have some sympathy with that. I had some concerns with where that conversation might go. And whether we might be expected to pay for those additional things. So if you could just comment on that in terms of, is that being included within the scope of this, and how might that be problematical for us?
Yes, I did touch on it earlier, but it's under section 31 scope on page 250 of the report. and under bullet point C. So the scope now also includes outlining the potential options for the Trust to diversify and continue its operations in relation to the long-term protection of Lake Taupō, making best use of its operating capability, establishing place in the community, relationships with stakeholders, and status as a registered charitable trust. In doing so, consider relevant examples of other charitable trusts in funding fundraising organisations involved in long-term ecological and environmental protection in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So that is a component that was really Taupō District Council, and we've accepted that of its inclusion because it's not binding. So they can go away. It doesn't say that they continue to manage the NDRAs. It says that maybe there's something else they could do of their own volition. Who knows how they're going to be funded, and here's some options for them to consider. I don't believe in that it puts a burden on WRC to say, oh, we're going to contribute to that or we support that. It say, well, that's, in my view, is something that if they want to do it, good luck. But we're not bound to have to support or fund that arrangement going forward. It is in conflict, I guess, with the other parts where we talked about all the other entities. And here's another one that may exist in the future. But I don't think, regardless of the recommendation back from the reviewers, that we're bound to have to do anything about that. To be frank, I think it's Taupō District Council's way of moving forward, noting that they are so attached to the trust and its view and their ratepayers' views that it has value and meaning for the lake.
Stu, you had the light on, it's off now. But
Just to wrap up, I think people also lose sight of the fact that the 27 agreements that the Trust have oversight of is the smaller part of the number of farmers in that catchment that all farm under resource consents who I think are free to trade amongst themselves if they so wish to via the regional council. So, but I guess the key point is, Neville, as part of this review, whoever the reviewer is will have an obligation to consult with the likes of ourselves to ensure that, because to me it's about making sure they've got the full picture, not just part of the picture.
And I'll ensure that that's established for all three settlers, that they have an absolute obligation to engage in dialogue.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, we had a good round or two and for a pound or two, and thanks very much, Neville, for answering those questions. I'll formally put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. The next item is that on exclusion of the public. I so move for the reasons on the overhead that we exclude the public from this section of the meeting. Moved by Remington, second by McPherson. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. These are minutes of the meetings of council. The first one is that of the 31st of March. It's for